LA County. How can we help you today?
I'm Richard Thor. I go by Dick Thor, and I'm the moderator of this session. And I'm going to have people introduce themselves.
I'll start. My name's Sara Matta now. When I was involved with Infoline, my name was Sara Turnbull, and my job was to be the main staff person at United Way that was involved in the study and creation of Infoline in the late 70s and early 80s.
My name is Esther Gillies. I'm the current president of the California Social Welfare Archives.
I'm Dick Thor, and I was on the board in the 60s of Infoline.
I'm Marj Nichols, and I was the research director at the Greater Los Angeles Community Action Agency until 1977, and a user of the info material, and later the research director at United Way.
And I'm Marj Wyatt, and I was the operations chair of the operations committee for Infoline when Cy Graff was the chair, and I think that was in the 80s.
And I'm Toby Osos, and I've been on the board of Infoline, I think, for 22 years, I think. And my connection was I was at a political fundraiser when the administrative officer for LA County sat next to me on my right, as I recall. I don't recall his name, and was telling me about the county, how much money the county through the feds came to the state and then came to the county for information and referral. And I said, oh, I thought that's what United Way did. And now he explained to me that that United Way provided that service, and so did the county. And that was his idea or concept, or what he was willing to take credit for at that time, was that he thought that this was a duplication and that they had found this out by testing it and that sort of thing. And he thought it was a waste of funds, and so that we ought to merge the funds and the organizations, and found it and kept me on his mail list, before we had email, and indicated, and I kept saying, but United Way is the one that really is helping people. I don't hear about the county. And so he shared what he believed about the county. But I feel that he was the person who pushed me at that time. Then I met Sara and knew Marj and got involved in a different way at a different level. But that was the first I'd heard of it. So
I just remember voting yes on you coming on the board.
right. And I was not on the first board because I didn't think I wanted to spend that time. But I helped on developing some training plans with you, Sara, as I recall. Not exactly who we were training or for what reason, but at that time I probably thought I knew the answers.
And I'm Frances Lomas Feldman. I put the Lomas in because when that program started, I was working still under my maiden name. And I'm going to give you some history, which goes way back. I was doing a study for what was then the community chest. In 1940, the board members were very concerned that people were going to private agencies and getting help that the newly emerging public agencies should be giving. And so the study was developed to see, were they giving services to public assistance eligible people? We didn't have many agencies in Los Angeles in 1940.
Didn't have any?
We didn't have many.
Oh,
We had very few agencies in the city of Los Angeles. We had only 3 family agencies, for example, and 2 of those were sectarian. In the course of my study, this particular survey, I went to a mission in San Pedro, where the director of the mission, telling me what they did, told me about their use of the Social Service Exchange. Do any of you remember the Social Service Exchange? It had been, the one in Los Angeles was created in 1925, but that was some years after the ones on the eastern seaboard. And the idea was that if a person applied to an organization for assistance of any kind, that a little slip would be made with their name and what they were asking for, and it would go to a central registry, and any other organization knowing that person would know about this new request. That Social Service Exchange was located in the Welfare Planning Council in the Research Division. When I went to this mission and was talking with this man about what it is that they did, he was telling me how careful they were to file reports with the Social Service Exchange. So in any day, they might send in 10 or 20 John Does, because these were seamen coming in and they didn't know. Can you imagine what would happen to Social Service Exchange, which already was expensive to operate, with all these John Does coming not just from this organization, but probably from others too. My husband was then doing some work in the research department, and he thought that was very funny. 2 years later, suddenly, the Social Service Exchange was under his jurisdiction. And he thought back about all these John Does. But other things had changed too. We now had a very extensive public welfare program for the categorical assistances for protective services, which had not existed when the exchange was started. There were now also more voluntary social agencies than there had been. But another thing that was important was that there was a great emphasis now on confidentiality, and that could not be protected with the Social Service Exchange. The exchange continued to exist. It actually went out of existence in Los Angeles in 1955, but it wasn't doing very much in between. But I don't know how many of you knew my husband, Albert Feldman.
I did.
I did.
He was very concerned about this expenditure of funds for little purpose through the Social Service Exchange. But what he had noticed was a number of calls that people made wanting help of one kind or another, and where should they go? There were not a great many agencies. And so he persuaded the Welfare Planning Council. It had a different name. It was Metropolitan Council of Los Angeles, I think, at that time. And it was funded, and it was a planning arm of the Federation, the Welfare Federation, with the community chest, the funding arm. And so they had some funds from the community chest. And what they did was to, instead of using the Social Service Exchange, was to employ 2 persons who could give information to people who called. You say, where shall I go? What shall I do? Then they made the contacts with agencies, or if they couldn't find an agency, they tried to find an individual who would help. It wasn't long before he persuaded Los Angeles County to fund one of these positions, especially for child welfare. And so this is how the welfare information started. He was there until 1942 when he went into military service. And then when he came back, I had a little book here. someplace.
It's in your folder.
No, that's the, no, I had another one. When he came back, there were still two people, one funded by the county, but they were really ready to grow. The problems at the end of World War II were tremendous, and he was very struck by the fact that there were not enough resources for them. And so they began to develop. When he left the Welfare Planning Council in 1950, they had a staff of 5. A couple of them funded by the county, but the United Way still was a community chest providing the funds. In 1945, they issued their first directory. This is a copy of it, and it listed all of the agencies in the Los Angeles region, and you might want to take a look at this. And after that, they began to develop larger publications, which would have all of the agencies listed. You will be able to speak to that. But this one was the first one. Al left that agency in 1950 because we went to the University of Chicago that year. And I'm telling Dick that suddenly during the night I thought of something that was relevant here. He had been impressed with the number of mental health problems. And mental health was a very unpopular subject in the whole, not just in Los Angeles, but all around the country. We were almost ready to come back to Los Angeles when Whit Pfeiffer, who was the director of the Welfare Planning Council, came to Chicago and said, Al, you have to come back now, because they were going to reorganize. And he wanted him back not for Welfare Information Service and these other things he'd been doing in the research department, but because he wanted him to head up the health division of the council. The council was set up with a child welfare division, a family division, youth services, the research department, and health. And Al said, remembering Welfare Information Service, not unless you agree that it would be health and mental health. And Whit agreed. And so it became both, with emphasis now on mental health. And that led, and this comes out of Welfare Information Service, and that led a few years later to the creation of the Los Angeles County Survey on Mental Health Services, which led to a number of agencies being created and services being added, and the creation of our own county mental health department, which was a byproduct of all of this. So with that historical background, I'll stop.
I have a question about mental health, because in those early days were not a lot of people that had extreme difficulties, mental health difficulties, were in institutions, hospitals.
We had state hospitals. We had a few private sanitarium.
Right.
But we did not yet have the Short-Doyle Act, which provided for services. In fact, in a way, the Welfare Information Service contributed to that, because Al couldn't get funding for this plan he had in his mind about a county survey where he would use hundreds of volunteers, professional and non-professionals, who, seeing what the needs were, would be ready to do something about providing services. He couldn't get funding. He tried the national agencies, and they said no. And he accidentally met Portia Hume, who was the Director of Community Services, a new position in the State Department of Mental Hygiene. And she was very interested in this. She came down here, sat that dining room table, had dinner with us, and told us, and Al told her what his vision was, and she said she would fund it using federal funds, the ones that they hadn't given him directly, but she had them available in the State Department of Mental Health. Portia Hume was also the person who had devised the idea of the Short Doyle Act. It was known as the Hume Act when it was being considered in the legislature. And the Short, who was added to the later version, was her cousin, Alan Short, a senator. And so she was very much involved. So she got Al involved in working on the Short Doyle Act. And she got me involved too. Because when he became ill suddenly one summer, I took over his steering committee, which created the Department of Mental Health. We had no facilities until the Short Doyle Act really came along. We had a psychopathic court. We had something called psychopathic social workers who worked for the court.
Right.
And the new hospital, new county hospital, the hospital wasn't new, but it had added a new section for the mentally ill and the criminal.
Yeah, right.
Finally they got separated, and the mentally ill were separated. And there was a court, the Lunacy Commission, which would hear the cases, but people didn't have a right to be represented. It depended entirely on what this Lunacy Commission said, whether they went to a state hospital or not.
Now, where in this timeline did Griffenhagen was at that time, or Krager was at that time, did the study for community chest?
Oh, she's talking about Griffenhagen Krager.
Right, now it
Associates.
was J. Krager.
She was a chief person on their staff, and when they had something on public welfare, they would call me in, so
Right,
I got
right.
involved. They did that study in 1945. They did a study of the community chest and of all the positions and agencies connected
Right.
that were funded by the community chest.
Thank you.
And there weren't many on mental health. And the Welfare Information Service had very little involvement in that.
I see the camera is coming my direction. I think maybe, Raphael, I should speak at the end since we've already started in the discussion.
Now, some of you went on the board of when it was still Welfare Information Service.
Yes, I was on the board. I was on the board in the early 60s to the early 70s. And Sara Turnbull was, Matta now, was on the board, as an intern, I think.
I never was on the board.
No, but I mean, weren't you an intern?
No, I was employed by the Planning Council of United Way.
Okay.
And I was the staff person, basically given the responsibility of doing the legwork for the community-wide study that was done in the late 70s.
Okay.
So that was fairly far along in terms of the history of what the Welfare Information Service, and I'm not sure how this happened, but it gradually became the Information and Referral Service of Los Angeles County, commonly known as Info.
Right.
And the name Info Line didn't come into play until that agency was, basically killed. And the new dissolved. That's a much nicer way of putting it. And the new agency, which was the Information and Referral Federation of Los Angeles County, which was the terminology that was felt to be appropriate given the results of the study that had led to its development. And that one was then took the name InfoLine, which was the name that was being promoted a lot across the country for these centralized information and referral agencies. And that was, I believe, incorporated in maybe 1980 and became operational in 81. The study was done between 75 or 76. I'm not exactly sure. I went to work in the downtown office of United Way in 75, and this was one of the first projects that I took on as a staff person in the Planning Council. So it was probably late 75, early 76 that the study was launched. You were, I think, on the board through that entire process.
Right.
And Barbara Thies was the
Yes.
executive director of what we called then Info.
Well, Barbara Thies took over the Welfare Information Service when Al left in 1950 and became the
In what year?
1950.
50.
And she became the director of the Welfare Information Service. Then. She had been working there with him almost from the beginning.
That's a long tenure. And then she retired
Yeah.
in
Yes.
the early part of the study process.
Right.
And then her associate director took over on an interim basis because I think it was pretty well known that everything was sort of up in the air about the future of the agency as it was, which was essentially at that point virtually 100% funded by United Way.
Yes, I think from about 1950 it was funded by the United Way.
So what were the findings of that study?
Well, the study was published, I think, in 1978.
It was indeed. Final committee action taken November of 78 and approved by the United Way Board March of 79 and the County Board of Supervisors April of 79.
April 79.
Right, yeah.
But I mean, what was the content of the finding?
Well, the purpose of the study had been to document the extent to which information and referral services were being provided. And by how many different agencies and with what different kinds of parameters and quality and all the rest of it. And the thought going into the study was it's not just going to document that all of this activity is going on, but also basically document how fragmented it was. That essentially everybody was doing information and referral, and therefore virtually nobody had the overall responsibility or authority or concern for, overall quality and accessibility. And that is basically what the study found. 200 and some agencies saying that they did information and referral and being able to document it to some degree. And the study committee had been composed in the first place of the major public agencies involved, Info itself, plus United Way, plus a whole bunch of the other agencies that had been providing information and referral. So it was a community organizing effort in the first place to pool all of the interested parties together and say, basically, this is a bad situation. It's not doing the community good. The only agency that really did nothing but information and referral was Info, and it didn't have the resources to be able to do the job for the community as a whole. It was only funded by United Way.
And I think that one of the interesting findings of it, or what I take away from it, because it continues to be an issue until today, was that some of those information referral services were specific to a particular subject area. Some of them were specific to a particular agency. Some were specific to a particular geographic community or community of need. And so, there was a certain tension there, in fact, a lot of tension in some cases, about people feeling that they should somehow be combined because they felt that nobody can do Pasadena like we can. Or nobody
and we did the Child Care Information Service in 1970.
That's right. That's right. And so those things continue to exist, and I think that there's still today in many quarters is the feeling that people are not familiar with the notion of a county-wide service, and they feel that they must have something particular to their interests. So it's a continual struggle.
Right.
Just to demonstrate that, hearing that many agencies think they do information and referral. Yesterday, I had a call from a friend who said she had a person, a neighbor, desperately needed help in finding someone to help her buy her groceries. And I gave her some ideas. And then this morning, I'm talking with a friend, Sharon, who family live in the Bay Area, and a member of that family has a mentally disabled, whatever his is, but he's an adult, maybe 30 years old, and turns out his mother is psychotic, and they don't know what to do. The kids that are now responsible for him with his 30-year-old who still wears diapers and that sort of thing. And she says, who do we call? I said, well, the first thing you should do is to call 211. And she'd never heard of 211.
That's right.
And
A lot of people haven't heard of 211.
Her very professional family had not heard of 211 and are beside themselves. And I thought, how appropriate. I said to her, that's what Marj and I are going to be at a meeting today to hear about the history of it. But, the needs, when I go to a board meeting and I look at the statistics of how many calls we've handled and what areas and what the profile looks like, and knowing that ever since I've been on the board, including when CSWA, when I first went on, is we never can answer all the calls. And in addition to not being able to answer all of them, there are a lot of people out there that don't. So when I think of what a great service it's been, it's just amazing how many people we've served and what would have happened to the demographics in this area had Infoline.
Sara, what was the result of the study in terms of a phone number? Do you remember?
Well, basically, the result of the study was that the two primary funders of information and referral services and of agencies decided they had to amalgamate their efforts and basically create a new entity. And that's why the name Federation of Information and Referral Services was taken at that time, and that is still, I believe, the legal name of what is now known as 211 LA County. Because the idea was there needs to be a central agency that has the authority from the major funders to be responsible for not only providing countywide 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day service to the public, but also for keeping the network of information and referral providers, the specialized and geographically specific ones that Marj was talking about, who will continue to exist and need to be there. They provide a depth of service that is very important, but an entity needs to keep those people working together and promote things like training, so that there are standards set and to the extent possible promulgated, and the staff in different agencies trained up. So the responsibility really was, and I believe that it was felt at that time, it was important to dissolve the old info, because it had a certain place in the community's mind, and create this new phoenix, to get buy-in, even though the actual agency that we now call Infoline basically was a continuation of info. The staff all moved over and became the core staff of Infoline.
Did they identify a phone number, like an 800 number?
They couldn't afford a single 800 number to
Okay.
cover the whole of Los Angeles County, and that's one of the problems.
That's what it says right here.
It
Cost
would,
prohibits
yeah,
doing
it
that.
would have at that time. Now they do have 800 service, but then it was cost prohibitive, and that was one of the problems. They had to advertise, I can't remember, 7 or 8 different numbers to provide toll-free access for the entirety of the county. And of course, that was one of the nightmares of trying to do, a major marketing effort for the agency, because, what number do I call? Well, here, if you're in the San Fernando Valley, you call this one. If you're in the San Gabriel Valley, you call this one, yada, yada. So that
You were
was a
very
major problem.
specific about the quality of the services that should be offered.
Right.
I mean, you've got pages of what needs to be, like, provide immediate response to callers.
Right.
Immediate.
Yeah, well, that
You know,
didn't
that's
quite
a
happen, did
quality.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that came to the committee that I was on, then on how are we going to do this?
And it's interesting because as this was going on in Los Angeles, the National Organization of Information and Referral Providers was being created at the same time. The organization that was the professional organization of information and referral providers, called the Alliance of Information and Referral Services or Systems, was born out of the Council on Social Work Education. I think
The
that's
National Council.
right. I may not have that exactly right, because I'm not.
I thought it was out of the National Social Welfare Assembly.
That doesn't sound quite right. I was at the last conference, and it happened to be held in Los Angeles, where the Information and Referral Group was a subgroup of the large one. And so, I was part of the subgroup, so I'm not exactly sure what the larger one was. So you may be right, Toby.
Well,
And then it created its own entity, basically, incorporated, and just a little lovely tidbit, Sandra Day O'Connor was the incorporating lawyer that incorporated the Alliance of Information and Referral Systems. It was incorporated in Arizona, and she was involved at that time. Anyway, so then it was creating itself. So the profession of information and referral services was in its infancy and was developing standards for the profession, and all of that has been developing on the national level at the same time this was happening
did we
in Los
have-
Angeles.
were there individuals in LA County who were active or participating at the national level, who were promoting and facilitating and providing leadership to what was happening at the national level?
There were, actually, our study here was quite pivotal in terms of what was coming out of United Way of America at that time. United Way of America actually promulgated the first standards and did that using a lot of the professionals that were, most of them were actually part of United Way or heavily funded by United Way. And they did their own report on information and referral services nationwide at about the time we were coming out with this report. And they actually changed some things.
1978 also.
Okay. They changed some things in the national report based on what we had been doing and were promulgating in Los Angeles. The whole notion of an integrated system of specialized and general, localized and region-wide, that notion basically was given a lot of oomph on the national level by the work that we did in Los Angeles. And we, it was a fairly small group at that time that was looking at all of this and formulating kind of the way that the field ought to go.
Because I know that Los Angeles has had a great impact on developing the taxonomy, which is
Absolutely.
used nationally.
International.
Yes, and internationally now. And so it was because of the leadership that was coming out of LA, Infoline.
Right, and
And
that's
so I wondered-
that's Linda.
Right.
You know, that's the however long Linda was the director of Infoline.
It was about 8 years,
I
wasn't it?
think, yeah.
Something like that.
A lot
It's a
of
guess,
this,
but I think
a
that's
lot of
right.
this work was being done because of her personal commitment and leadership, and then the way the agency was able to continue that on through the years.
And I think that's a very important point for us to make in looking at the history of information and referral, is the kind of leadership that has come out of LA County. As you say, it may be individuals, but they've had the support of the boards. They've been able to convince the Board of Supervisors. And actually, the United Way in LA County doesn't really fund Infoline anymore.
Much.
So the basic funding
They
comes,
continue to fund.
pardon me?
They continue to fund, but it's not very much. A couple $100,000.
Right. Well, it must be so minuscule that when I look at the budget, I missed it.
That's right.
In terms of the total budget, you know.
But you know, Toby, I think you brought up a very important point in talking about your initial conversation with the county person, because I think that what's really very important to understand here is the relationship between the public and the private sector.
Right.
We've been talking all about the private sector, and I'd have to say I'm not real well informed about the detail of what the county did. But at the time that this study was going on, the county was moving forward in a sort of a very unusual, revolutionary way for the county in developing their own system for classifying services. And what I remember as being influential at this time is that was sort of the introduction of automated data processing in the information referral, the information process. Because previously with the Welfare Information Service, it was all by hand, and all of the review, I remember at some point I sat on a panel reviewing job training programs, and I got to thinking about it later. It was kind of like a sorority review process, because you'd sit around and say, well, what about this one? Do you know anything about them? Well, you know, they might be kind of commercial, or et cetera, et cetera. So it was very, very hands-on, and people in different fields participated on these review panels, and nothing went out in the info directory that wasn't carefully combed through by people in the field. But as the county began to move in a different direction with what they were doing and really amping up their investment in it, then they brought a different perspective and the different oomph of money. So that as we've seen, what's happened is this transition from private funding to largely public funding.
That's
Very
right.
interesting.
And Infoline relies very heavily now. I mean, it's major funder
Right.
is the county, and so our relationship with the county supervisors is very important. Zeroslavsky is always the key one that carries it, but our office is located in Gloria Molina's district,
Mhm.
and she has a lot of input and questions, and so
It's interesting how that developed too, because the idea always was that the county needed to be the major driver of this, because that's where the money was.
But didn't know how.
But didn't know how.
Right.
But it happened that there was some money that was available right at the right time when Infoline was being created, and that's the Title 20 money. And
That's
what
right.
happened was that United Way basically said, okay, we'll put up 25% if the county will put up 75%. We'll give the county the local share that needed to be there for Title 20 federal money. And that was the initial budget of Infoline. Now it's gone way above that, and Title 20 basically doesn't exist anymore. But it had a mandate for information and referral with it, and there was this way of managing to leverage the traditional funding to info, which was the United Way money, and then leveraging it the additional 3-to-1, which was in some ways, I don't know if we'd done the same study 5 years later, would we have been able to do the same thing? I don't know. Some things just fell into place at the right time that I think were really important. And then, now LA County is unique in terms of how much the county owns Infoline. There isn't another county in California where the county has that level of ownership.
right.
And it's unusual across the country even. Yeah.
And I think it's been very incumbent upon a couple of us who've been long-term on the board to try and interpret that when we get a new executive director, is what that relationship is with the county, and having a political nose. I always point out that our bylaws say that we will have equal number from the each of the supervisorial districts of people who came up through the social services and the people who come up through the county. And we're not very good at following that, but it does tell me that we need to really speak at least to the staffs of each of the districts, and that can be Antonovich from this district. I guess his district goes all the way out to the valley. And I think there's still areas where we have very limited contacts and utilization. I mean, it's the central areas that and maybe that's because of what the demographics are like.
Well, what about the role of the specialized information and referral service like Child Care Information Service? How does that fit in the total picture and in terms of the way the thing developed?
In terms of the way the thing developed, you mean how we got into Infoline?
No, in terms of the way Infoline developed and along our specialized information
Well,
services.
Of course, I only know the Child Care Information Service in Pasadena because I was on the committee that started that, and we were from United Way, and then it became an independent committee and body. and its goal was to make sure that people who needed child care could get quality child care. Well, that's not as easy as it sounds, because when trying to determine quality in a child care situation, and it takes months of about 10 people arguing about what it is, and finally you get there. But it's been in place now since 1970, and I'm still working on committees with it, and it's working really very well. We provide information not only to parents and community people, but we provide information to providers, both the child care providers, in-home providers, as well as in the school district and the large child care places. And I don't remember that we had any objections to being part of InfoLine. We wanted to be part of InfoLine. And I think the reason I finally was on that committee was I was active in the United Way and with the Child Care Information Service, and so I got put on that committee, the first committee of InfoLine with CSWA. And we spent most of, as I remember, what we did mostly, at least the first couple of years, we were trying to make sure that we knew what we were doing, and we wanted to be sure that that we had quality services at InfoLine, and that we spent a lot of time on making sure the training was taking place, because you not only had people who had never been trained on specifics about information and referral in the sense that that came out of your committee that we were implementing, but you had a constant turnover of personnel in these jobs, so that you were once again beginning from scratch. And it was not easy, but the training was the most important thing, I think, that committee that I was on did. Although we also dealt with, what do you do with the person who calls up and said, I just took some rat poisoning, now what do I do? What do you train your people to do? What kind of answers do you have? What can you tell them? How much of the information is that you can't tell anybody else? That's private information. It just seemed to me that we spent a lot of time working on one problem after another that came in as a result of the callers, as to how do you deal with those specific things. And but we did it, and then we got Toby, and that was it. She knew what to do. She and Linda Lewis knew what to do.
Yeah.
Well, the telephone company was very helpful in all of this. That's why CSWA was there, because the telephone company wanted one credit for making it work, and they wanted it to work, and so they spent a lot of time and money
And the board,
trying to make sure.
on the board, we still have another person from AT&T. He was with SBC and now it's AT&T, John Donner. And I tease him quite often saying, John, you're always so quiet. He rarely gets involved in all these other issues, but he's a very key resource in terms of whether it's a glitch in the system or what would be best, or who to talk to about solving any of the problems we have. And now everyone is exploring how you respond to calls that are whatever people hold in their hands, cell phone, and you don't have a really...
There were no cell phones when we started.
Well, that's right.
Or if they were, I didn't know what they were.
But all sorts of different issues come up because of the change in technology. And
Toby, do you know how many people are working there at InfoLine now?
Yes, I should know, but I would say we have probably 65 full-time, and then we have some part-time people that are just weekends or something like that, and I'm not sure how we count that.
Would you have staffing 24 hours?
7/24, right. And
That was
We-
one of the musts that came out of that committee, that it had to be 24 hours.
right. Now, the other thing is, we can respond to calls in something over 100 different languages
Yeah.
through the telephone companies. And so we have on the staff at the present time, 2 or 3 of the Chinese languages, Mandarin and whatever the other major one is, Japanese. And I think we only have one on the staff of Japanese, but she also takes at-home calls if necessary, but we can get it through AT&T. Those calls, of course, we have a lot of bilingual people as far as Spanish is concerned. The real difficulty in terms of the other languages is you have to put together somebody that's holding their hand that even made the first call. You have that person, and then you have us, and then you have AT&T's interpreter, so it becomes a big job. We handle a lot of calls like that. And I'm not sure, when I look at Infoline Atlanta or Infoline 211 Connecticut or Atlanta, they may not deal with any of those.
They have to. That's a requirement of a 211.
Right.
They have to. Yeah.
But I'm just thinking in terms of, they have to, but in terms of utilization.
There won't
right.
be the same demand, right?
Right.
Toby, what response do we have in terms of volume?
Right.
Do you know?
I was wishing Julio came because we get we meet every other month, and we always get a report on the number of calls for the month, what our target is, because our contract with the county requires or is based on so many calls. So we always want to be sure we're meeting that, and we want to be sure how many more than that we can. And I can't tell you how many it is. I look at those charts, but that's a question.
One of the things that came out of Sarah's committee was that it must have sufficient telephone and staff capability to prevent busy signals. We were never able to get there when I was there. There was still.
But that's where the 24-hour service came in.
Yeah.
I used to continually advise people, call at night,
Right.
call at night.
well, and we measure every month how many dropped calls there are. You assume a lot of dropped calls are because they don't want to wait, but we measure what the wait time is, and also we get a report on that. And we could send all of you copies, or somebody a copy of the monthly report.
I just think they should have it.
We
Right.
should have that.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Just remind me.
I'll
In case-
remind you.
Sometimes my long-term memory is better than my short-term memory, so. We do, in addition to the funding we get from the county, we provide services. I heard you mention First Five. We answer their calls now, right? That wasn't the way First Five started, I don't think, but.
I think that they set up a program, but it was to be operated through
Right.
Infoline.
Right.
Would you define First Five?
First Five was the state initiative that set up the tobacco tax to fund health and services to children. And some of it involves tobacco cessation, but also it goes toward health and then each county has this first 5 commission that deals with services to preschool children. The notion being that if you can provide school readiness services, you'll be able to uplift the whole population.
And that gets into childcare because we go to
Yes, it
providers
does.
with those services
Right,
and so
right.
forth.
And that raises an interesting question. It gets back to those specialized services, because I think that 211 still operates on the premise that when it comes to children's service, to childcare, that they're a parallel service. And if you call 211 for childcare, they're going to connect you to one of the state's network of resource and referral agencies for childcare. So that it's a, they're
Well,
flexible
that's what they should be
arrangements.
doing, yes.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
That's right.
I don't know if there's any other field of service in which they do that.
Oh, yeah, lots, because,
Oh.
I mean, the two major systems that exist that are state-funded are the childcare information services, or resource and referral they're called, and then the aging system. And that is also totally funded, through federal and state funding, and is across all the geography. So you always have childcare information services and aging information services in the communities, and they need to be very much part of just the constant kind of back and forth. In some places, they actually are the same agency. The aging agency is the generic information and referral. And in some cases, actually, the childcare is too, not in California, but in some other states. But those are the two really big systems of specialized information and referral. And then, of course, you've got, the whole suicide prevention arena,
right.
Where very often you've got a separate agency which may or may not be county supported. And then all the different specialized ones. The others that are very important to work very closely with are domestic violence. That's one where usually what tends to happen is that very specialized protocols get put into place between the specialized information and referral service systems and the info line, with very different kinds of protocols depending on the situation. And sometimes what we call a warm transfer, so the person just gets sent right over to the next person, and sometimes it's just a make sure and a follow up, make sure that they did get connected. But yeah, different protocols depending on the situation. But I think you raised an interesting issue, because I'm really not sure the extent to which the specialized information and referral agencies in Los Angeles feel the same level of ownership of Infoline that they do in some other places.
Particularly since they're geographic.
Yeah, I think that's one of the huge challenges for Los Angeles. I have experience now having done the same thing in San Diego, which is less than a third the size. It's much easier in San Diego to keep the relationships alive and vibrant with all of the specialized providers in a place like San Diego. Even though San Diego is huge, it's the size of the state of Connecticut, but it's possible because you can actually know the people. And so I think that is one of the horrendous challenges of a single agency serving the entirety of Los Angeles County. I know that Infoline has had staff people doing nothing but this kind of work, working with the agencies and making sure that those relationships are kept tight. But I still think that it's a continuing challenge. And I don't have a sense of what's going on at the moment with that, although I know that 211 LA County has specialized advisory committees in the different fields of service, so as to make sure that there is a body of people who are very involved with disability services, for example, watching out and making sure that the relationship with Infoline is still strong. So I know they've got an organized system of of doing some of that on an ongoing basis. I don't know how much of the resources are going towards it. One of the fascinating things that I find in information and referral is what has happened in the, what is it now, about 40 years that I've been involved in it, how the technology has changed and how the information and referral provider really needs to be at that intersection of the social service and health service world with a focus on, you know, the importance of the individual human connection, but at the same time taking advantage of the latest in technology. And we were just talking about how now it's not even just the phone calls, but you know, it's funny how the 211 movement, which now is about 10 years old in terms of the real work of it, that's focused on dialing 211 or punching 211 on the phone, but actually it's going way beyond phone service now in terms of access through the internet and goodness knows what all, texting and all of that sort of stuff on cell phones as well. So it's always changing, because the business of providing information in an easy way to people changes as they use information in different ways, and that's a fascinating aspect of the whole environment.
Do you just push Google and then 211 and see what you get?
Actually, we are talking to Google about you know, having some kind of relationship so that when people do Google, that there can be some kind of special gateway into their local 211, but we're not there yet. We haven't been able to get them to think that it's as important as some of the other things they're doing, but there are continuing conversations.
But I think that the thing that's fascinating here in Los Angeles is the seamless transition from one phase to another of this. Mm-hmm. Because today, what started out as the Welfare Information Service has transitioned into 211, and they now provide the database for Healthy City, which is basically an internet information and referral service. And they're carrying it to another level in that they're also bringing in access to a great deal of welfare data of all kinds. I don't mean just public assistance, but demographic information, all other kinds of things. And then they've linked that with geographic information systems so that you can map the data. So for example, if we type in this zip code and say that we want to see services for seniors, instantly it comes up on a map with regard to this particular address. And this seems very natural to people who have gotten used to that kind of system. And I think to many of us it's just wonderful. But the fact that it's all based on the InfoLine database and that there's this lively collaboration there is really interesting.
I've been concerned at the Child Care Information Service because they now are online and people call or they dial CCIS and ask however they do that for a child care placement, and then there's a response of the 3 or 4 things that are available in the area in which they want it. One of the reasons that CCIS exists and the county wasn't still doing it is because that's what the county was doing years ago, and we thought that the parents or the people who were looking for child care who didn't have any idea about what was out there needed to have some kind of information about what the real choices are and what is it you're looking for your child, and a discussion with someone.
Exactly.
And so we haven't resolved that problem yet about what we do now that we can go online and come in.
That's right. I mean,
They're
it's
still
not like
working on
having
that.
a knowledgeable person take the question and then help persons to understand what their options might be. Because maybe someone calls in and says, I need childcare because there was a domestic violence incident, my husband kicked us out of the house. Well, you could
Yeah.
hook the person up with that too, but if they call and ask for childcare, it'll never happen.
I think the thing is, though, that it's not an either or.
Mhm.
You know, I think because people,
And you can't turn back.
you can, and as long as, in fact, we just had this conversation yesterday about building a statewide system for 211, which, and our concern at this point is particularly for having statewide coverage in the event of disaster. All these fires up north have been occurring in areas where there is no 211, and there's really no prospect of a 211 developing in those counties. They're way too small, too rural, and so on. And this issue came up then about we're designing the technical specifications for this statewide system. And are we talking about a system that will be reliant on one-to-one personal communication over the phone, or are we talking about the menu-driven kind of system where if people need the latest information on what shelters open, they can punch one and get that information. And basically we had the same conversation that the value of 211 still so much is the one-to-one communication that occurs. And I know that was my own experience in the fires in October when I actually was a user of 211. But it isn't an either or, because some people are fine with a pre-recorded message or with going into a website and typing it up, as long as somehow or another you communicate that if you need more than that, there's somebody on the end of the phone that you can talk to. And I think that's the part that will never be totally replaced. It may be that we'll do an awful lot more of all the other things as well, but I don't think that will ever be replaced.
And that's too where the issue of taxonomy comes into it, So many people feel that taxonomy is what a snoozer. But I guess I've always been fascinated with taxonomies. And I had the occasion of working with a Healthy City data last week when I was trying to do some research about access to services for homeless families with young children. Okay. Now I want to know about family shelters. Do you think I could find family shelters looking with Healthy City? I couldn't. And I know pretty well how to use that system. I was surprised, how that revealed a weakness of how you run a taxonomy on that kind of a system. Now I think, to me it's obvious if I'd called Infoline, if I was looking for an actual shelter of that sort, that I would have found a much better response. I mean, I know that there are a lot more family shelters than came up, and looking at family shelters, I had no way of knowing, do they have children's services at this family shelter?
Well, and money is an issue because CCIS is having trouble with not having enough money, and you have to pay people to be on the phone to do this one-to-one,
Right.
and so that becomes part of the discussion too. And I'm sure that if it's in little old CCIS, it's all over the whole system.
And we read that not only are there fewer volunteers today, but there are fewer volunteer dollars to support services. And eventually that has to boil over to, there are going to be fewer dollars given whatever the population is and the population needs at the public level too, at the county or the state. So I don't know what, because we pride ourselves on that we're not out fundraising. We're providing a service that
Is a public service.
Right, is a public service, right. I've seen public services come and go, so,
Well, that leads us to the issue of the federal mandate that really enabled
Right.
Infoline to get off the ground, and how critical it is to have human services elements to many kinds of legislation that have broad coverage. Or like the Older Americans Act, you know, obviously that's absolutely critical, but where's the Younger Americans Act when it comes to families with children? I don't know what the nature of a mandate would be for that. But when it comes to child abuse, we have mandated services, but what about regular kids?
No. And as our population issues, you know.
The
child-
diversity,
Pardon me?
just the diversity of the
Right,
population.
yeah. And the issues related to it. I had somebody ask me a question of if they called Infoline, could they get information about organizations that were dealing with the trafficking of women issues. And I said, I don't know, but call, 211 and see what they have. I'm going to bring it up. I was going to mention it to Julio if he came, but that's a whole new issue on our horizon. Not that it hasn't existed for many years, but we're hearing a lot more about it. It's being
Thanks to
exposed.
those organizations.
Right. So, I don't know. We added a new member on the board, Phil Hawkey,
Oh, really?
right?
Well, former city manager in Pasadena, now at what
And
college?
Laverne College, he's the executive vice president. This came about because
What is your name again?
Phil Hawkey, Hawkey. And when you said you couldn't really look, how did he find out? Because he was so good at, when he was being interviewed, at the kinds of questions he asked, because he said, I went to the internet and I looked at, and he our connection with Healthy Cities and with First Five and things like that really inspired him. And then he had questions about financing. And his first question had to do with, are we financially sound? And of course your answer is going to be yes, we are in terms of the budget. But I've been around a long time. I've seen things up and down. So, I say we are, but who knows, going to be elected to the Board of Supervisors when Sara leaves, or when any of them leave. It's going to change the dynamics of that board. And that's, I might have an issue about whether or not we should have more supervisors, but we're not going to get them in my lifetime.
We all might have an issue about that.
Right. But they have little fiefdoms. So,
I think it might be time to talk about CSWA if we've run out of questions. Is the feeling of the group that we've run down? Okay, and talk about a little bit about California Social Welfare Archives. Esther.
Well, I think that what we've observed today is an example of the purpose and the function of the California Social Welfare Archives, which is devoted to collecting and to preserving the history of social welfare activity in the state of California. And today what we have seen is the progression and the evolution of an idea and a service that began very small in the early 1940s actually, and I think, Francis, you even dated it back to about 1925, so that we've come almost 80 years in the history of information services in Los Angeles County. So it's an excellent example of, in this case, we're collecting the oral history of a service in California. The archives also maintains actual paper archives of important documents, historical papers, And about the issue of the information services, we already in our archives have some materials, and as a result of this discussion today, we'll be seeking out additional materials to expand our information base on information services in California. So essentially, that's what our California Social Welfare
And
Tell us more about how persons access the service.
We actually are online. The California Social Welfare Archives can be located at, I do not have the number. Do we know the address? In the addendum that we will be developing for this film, we'll include the email, the web address, which identifies the papers that are already on file. It also identifies all of the oral histories that are on file. Many of our oral histories are in fact in written form. They were taken as an oral audio tape and then transcribed into written form. In the last year or two, we have begun videotaping our interviews, and this is one of the new series of videotaped oral histories. So the materials are actually housed at the University of Southern California and maintained by the library system at the University of Southern California.
and
Could I, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Could I ask, do you have a relationship with the Southern California Historical Library? The Southern California Research Center. That's what they're called. And they specialize in ethnic and union history.
I think that we may have a relationship with many historical societies through our membership and through our activities. I don't know an official relationship, Francis, maybe you can help me.
But some of us belong to the other. Are you talking about Southern California Historical Society or the library down on?
The library,
Yeah.
yes.
I belong to both, so I know about them. They have collected certain kinds of materials.
Right, it's specialized.
Yeah, they're quite specialized, the materials of activists particularly. And when someone is in touch with our archives and is looking for a particular topic, we also refer them to the
That's
other.
what I'm thinking.
Yeah, the difference is that they're independent,
Right.
as is Southern California Historical Society. And we're part of a university. Ours is the only social welfare, health and welfare archive connected with a school of social work in a university, except for the University of Minnesota. And they only collect national materials. So when something comes in our direction that really belongs to them, we send it
Do them, right?
to them. So we have a very good working relationship.
What I'm thinking about the difficulty of maintaining these smaller collections, and the importance of that networking. So if something should happen to the other organizations, it could be transferred. Such wonderful material.
Well, everything, and I don't really understand how to do anything on the computer, but it seems to me that,
I don't know, you send me emails.
well,
You know,
I can write
sometimes.
email, but I just can't relate one thing to another. But I was thinking about, there should always be a referral link.
Yeah.
Yes.
Back and forth.
Yes.
Now, when the YWCA moved here in Pasadena, sold its building, we had a lot of stuff in the basement, and we called the
Sure.
Huntington Library. And they said they take everything from when we used 4x6 cards and recorded who paid 50 cents to rent a room. And I thought, those old things. So I said to the person that was collecting it, why would you want all this old stuff? And he said, well, the YWCA is the oldest women's movement, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I said, and he said, there will be people that'll be writing papers. And I said, but how would they ever find out? They could be doing
that they
on
have
paper,
it.
on the women's movement,
Right.
but why would they know that they should look under YWCA, you know, and, you know, he said, well, that's a good question. So I'm thinking, does the Huntington Library know about the social work
I
architect?
think
They do,
Yes.
They do.
okay, good, I'm
Yes.
glad. For-
And I think the questions you raise, though, are ones that we also internally are raising. How
Right.
do we make the information,
Right.
you know, even listing all of our oral histories, how can we better make the information available to researchers so that we have enough key words
Right.
that if I were looking for something in a particular area, I would go to the oral
Right,
histories.
that's right.
So
Yes, for
that's-
example, someone called me a few days ago who was doing a research project on public health and wanted to know what we have in the archives. Well, we have some materials. Offhand, I couldn't tell him, but I could tell him that we had oral history interviews with the former director of the School of the Department of Public Health, who started the school at UCLA in public health. We had to have the oral history of the former director of the Los Angeles City Health Department. And there are others. They tell about public health issues that this man was especially interested in, but he didn't think about individual histories.
Right, yes, that's right.
It's very interesting.
So we cross-reference some of those. He happened to call me, and I had happened to do those interviews, so I knew they were here.
Thank you, the panel, and if there's anything last minute that you want to contribute, please do. That's a wrap.
How did you become involved with information services, and how long have you been involved?
Altogether, I have been involved for about 33 years. I started out with the old Info, which was the United Way sponsored Information and Referral Services back in 1978. At that time, my job was to act as an outreach worker. And what that meant is that the United Way was making an effort at that time to reach out to the Spanish-speaking population, specifically in the San Fernando Valley. So that was my introduction to the field of information and referral services.
And then what happened?
Well, it was intended to be, or it was my intention that that was going to be a temporary job. However, opportunities came along the way, and I truly enjoyed the work. I think it's much more in my nature that I wanted to admit, and 33 years later, here I am, and I can say that it has been a very rewarding journey for me. I started out, again, as an outreach worker, and then I became information and referral specialist, which is basically the individuals that answer the phones. After that, I became a supervisor of information and referral services, program manager, at this point already with Infoline, which was the successor of the original United Way sponsor information and referral service. And at some point in the history of Infoline, there was need for someone that will oversee the finances of the organization, but there was no money in the budget for that. And the director, the executive director at the time, was aware that I was pursuing a degree in business administration, so he asked me, Julio, what do you think? And I say, well, yes, that's my calling, I think. And I have been fortunate that I'm still providing for what I consider to be a very valuable service to the community, and it has been rewarding for me as well. Historically, I would like to mention the transition between the United Way sponsor Information and Referral Service to Infoline, and then Infoline became what is now recognized as 211 LA County. Back in the days of the original agency in 1978, there were two major services providing information and referral services in LA County, the United Way Info and the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Social Services. They had also a department called the TRI unit, TRI, that stands for Telephone Referral Information. And my understanding of why the county had that particular telephone information unit is because the number of participants in the welfare assistance programs was growing, and where originally the Department of Public Social Services, commonly known as the Welfare Office, my understanding is that they actually had social workers on staff that will not only provide information and referral, but also work with the individuals and families, not only in terms of their basic needs for food and medical and cash assistance, but also any other problems. As the numbers increase, the social workers were replaced by, I believe they still use the title eligibility workers, where basically these individuals would determine the applicant's eligibility for either cash assistance, food stamps, and again, when I say food stamps, they are recognized by the name CalFresh. So even that has changed over the years. Currently we refer to as the CalFresh program, but it was the old food stamps. In any case, so the eligibility workers, they determine eligibility for public assistance, but they were not able to assist with other needs, such as if the person had an elderly parent in the house, or an adolescent that may have problems at school and so on. So that's why the county had the TRI unit, the Telephone Referral Information, to address those needs. And the United Way also had the Information and Referral Service, and that was primarily in response to their campaigns, where individuals that participated on the United Way fundraising campaigns will call because they either needed help or they knew someone in need of help, and the United Way funded agency, Info, will provide that information. Mm-hmm. Sometime in the 70s, under the auspices of the United Way, a group of volunteers from the community did a study of the two information and referral services and the fact that there was duplication and service gaps as well. Like, for example, not all areas of the county were served by the two projects together. There was no 24-hour, 7 days a week capability, and very limited bilingual capability. So as a result of that study done by these volunteers, a recommendation was made that the United Way and the County of Los Angeles consolidated their resources and created a nonprofit organization for the sole purpose of providing information and referral services to the County of Los Angeles residents on a 24-hour, 7 days a week basis and with bilingual capabilities. That's how Infoline came to be.
And that was at what point in time?
The Infoline began operations in March of 1981.
Okay.
And the current, so that was the progression of the agency, and at that time, as I mentioned earlier, I was an information and referral specialist, basically one of the folks that answered the phones and addressed people's needs. We evolved from being a strictly general information and referral organization to an organization that became a leader in the field of information and referral across the nation. We developed a taxonomy of human services which allow us to classify all the community resources in a way that is easily identified, and we can retrieve the information very efficiently. And other information and referral services across the nation actually use our taxonomy as the basis for how they organize their database. At the same time, in addition to the basic information and referral services that was being provided on a 24-hour, 7 days a week basis, we started developing what we call specialized lines. For example, one of the first specialized lines that we had is the Elder Abuse Hotline, which not everyone is aware that we, meaning 211 LA County, are actually the agency that answers that line under our county contract. That line is specifically for individuals and mandated reporters that need to report situations of elder abuse or neglect. That was established sometime towards the mid or late 80s. It was one of our first dedicated lines. One more recent dedicated line that we have is the Safely Surrendered Baby, which you may have seen bumper stickers in cars encouraging mothers that are considering perhaps abandoning their babies to call for assistance and direction on where to turn the babies in safely. We also answer that line. And then there are special campaigns, like for example, the county health department had a special campaign dealing with the H1N1 epidemic. We had a dedicated line for that. And in recent years, we also had an agreement with the FIS 5 LA Commission to provide a specialized line that we called the parenting line, which was parenting helpline, I'm sorry, that basically provides information and referral service as the basis. However, it specializes on the needs of pregnant women and children 0 to 5, which is the target population of the FIS 5 LA Commission. And that's a separate line that is operated in our facilities as well. And lastly, in case of a major disaster, we will be the county hub for dissemination of information related to community resources and available services. We are not first responders, we are not going to be dealing with emergencies, but anything related with information and the recovery efforts, we will play a major role, and that is part of our agreement with the county that we operate the county disaster hotline as well.
Structurally speaking, when the evolution began to what we see today, you were a collaborative effort between United Way and the county. But as these specialized lines have been added, have you added more partners in the process?
As I mentioned, FIS 5 LA has been a partner of approximately 5 years. And then we have partnerships. I want to separate the concept of partnership with funding. We do get funding again from the county, United Way, FIS 5 LA. We also have a service agreement with LASA, the Los Angeles Homeless Authority, where we provide an after-hours hotline for individuals seeking shelter. And we have had a few seasonal time-limited relationships with the state agencies and even with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. After the 1994 Northridge earthquake, we actually deployed 17 of our information and referral services workers to the disaster assistance centers that were established throughout the county, and we did that for almost 6 months. So we assisted the federal government with that part of the recovery effort after the Northridge earthquake. And then in terms of partnerships, we have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of community agencies that we have worked throughout the years. They have participated with us in task forces. We refer our callers to their services. They call us when they need help. So I could give you a list, but our roots in the community are very extensive.
So you have expanded in terms of partnerships, you've expanded in terms of funding.
Yes.
And become a very complex organization.
Correct.
Complex and sophisticated. in terms of current day needs.
Yes.
Very impressive. Now you've described your specialized lines and the different funders. What people use 211? How do they know about you? And about how many people use the service in a given period of time?
To give you an idea of the volume of calls that we answer, I'll give you the figures for our last completed fiscal year, which was 2009-2010. We answer over 600,000 calls, which will average something like 1,500 to 1,600 calls a day. The people that call us are typically in need, and sometimes crisis. We do not advertise our services as a crisis lines, but when you are open to the public on a 24-hour basis, we do get crisis. And the reasons why people call us could be anything. The majority of our calls are for basic subsistence, such as folks that need financial assistance. They need to know about how to apply for government programs that would help them. They may need actually in immediate need of what we call emergency food, which will mean a referral to a food pantry that will give them enough food to get them going for a week or so. They may be actually homeless and in need of shelter. It could be a family recently arrived to town, or it could be a woman that is escaping domestic violence. And then on what I would describe as the light side of the spectrum will be, for example, someone that they're gonna go on a cruise and they found out that they need a passport and they need it tomorrow, and we will provide that information as well, how to apply for a passport. And I'm just mentioning that as an example of the emotional roller coaster that it is for our staff to be dealing with a life and death situation, and then the next call may be completely recreational in nature or not very complicated at all. And in between you have seniors that need services, you have substance abuse issues, you have issues with legal assistance, folks that may need guidance as far as how to respond to an eviction notice, or if they feel that they have been unfairly treated at work and so on. I can tell you that the majority of our callers, about 75% are women, majority with children, and about 40% of our callers are Hispanic, and about 25 to 30% require a language other than English. We are able to, about 60% of our telephone staff is bilingual, English, Spanish, so any call in Spanish will be handled by our own staff. But we have an agreement with a teleinterpreting service that will actually allow us to offer help in over 140 languages. In basically the way it works is that the person will call us. Once we identify the language that they need, we will conference that call with the teleinterpreting service, and they will have an interpreter of that particular language on the line with us. So it will be a three-way conference call. We have that capacity as well.
I can see that the organization is evolving right into the 21st century, technologically speaking. What about people reaching out for information? Do you find that there is an increase in use of websites and email requests for assistance? Is the organization feeling that impact at this point?
We are definitely moving in the direction of making our services and our database more available and more user-friendly on our website. But the core of our business, at least in my impression, remains one of a human being talking to another human being. We don't have solid data on this, but the impression we have is that our website may be used primarily by professionals in other organizations that are looking for referrals for their clients. And instead of calling us or telling the person call 211, they will look up the information themselves, which is a good thing. So we are definitely moving in terms of making our information more available. However, the nature of information is very volatile, and that's one of the reasons why we are often asked, why don't we publish directories? And we used to, and we found that a directory, a printed directory, basically is 20 to 30% obsolete by the time it comes out of the press. So we have put a tremendous effort in making sure that the information in our database is accurate. And to give you an idea, we have 7 full-time what we call resource writers that are staff persons that all they do is verify the accuracy of the information we have in our database. And our database, by the way, consists of close to 5,000 different programs in and agencies in Los Angeles County alone.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the categories developed by which you catalog your services were actually developed here in Los Angeles. What are those categories? Is it something too broad to mention here, or is it categories that you could list for us?
Our taxonomy of human services, the basic structure is about 5 levels, and then it goes into subsets. And for example, just to give you a very quick example, if we were to look at food, well, the basic category food then will be divided into emergency food or non-emergency food, and then we will go into programs like such as the food stamp program, and then it becomes more specialized as we search, and then it will be maybe a specific need for Meals on Wheels, or maybe it's a dietary issue, or maybe even something more exotic like a particular diet that may be rare and a special medical condition may require. So the way our taxonomy is structured, how we store information, it becomes more in-depth and more sophisticated as the need arises. And that's one of the reasons why it's a tool that has been adopted and well received widely. To give you an idea of how we handle a typical call to 211, we'll begin with establishing contact with the caller. Then we will ask that person's zip codes, and the zip code will help us in zeroing in what is the geographical area that the person is calling from. Then the next step will be to make an assessment of the need. Most of our callers have multiple needs. We try to focus on the most serious one. And so at the same time that we are talking to the caller, we enter that information in our system and we start searching. So we start with the geographical location, then the type of service, then if there is any particular characteristic of that caller that require a special service, like for example, in the case of a need for a referral for family counseling, they may need after-hours appointments because they're not available during the day, that kind of thing. So once we enter all that information, the database is searched by a proprietary software that was also developed by us that will then give us the most appropriate referrals for that person, for that need in that area. And then if nothing is available in that area, we will expand the search into surrounding zip codes. And at the same time that all of this is happening, the system is collecting statistics that then we don't get the names of the individual. It's very rare. Our services are free and confidential. Very seldom we need, most of the time we don't need the individual's names. But we do capture the information of what they needed, where they're calling from, and who was going to be the beneficiary of the service.
How many employees are working on this, on 211 today?
Currently, we have 98 employees, of which approximately 50 to 55 are telephone staff.
It's a large operation.
Yes.
Are there other people involved in the organization we should make note of in this tape today?
Well, I mentioned the taxonomy of human services. That taxonomy was developed by a lady called Georgia Sells, and she's still with us. She's the person that developed and maintains the taxonomy. And if you are interested in that specific aspect of our work, of how we classify information and how the taxonomy was developed, definitely she would be someone to talk to.
Okay. Are there other things about the organization that you feel we should capture on tape today?
I would like to talk about the transition to the 211 system, because that is really important. Again, going back in time, at the beginning with the Information and Referral Service agency that was in place in 1978 under the auspices of the United Way, that agency had two offices, one in the San Fernando Valley, one in Los Angeles. And the total staff, I believe, was 12 at the time. And we had different numbers for different areas with different area codes. Then, when Infoline was established in 1981, believe it or not, the concept of toll-free 1-800 number didn't exist then. So Infoline began with also having, which if I recall correctly would be something like 12 or 13 different local numbers. So someone in the San Fernando Valley would dial one number, somebody in Long Beach would dial a different number. All those calls will come to a central location. Infoline was located in the city of El Monte. We occupied a county-owned building at the time. And then we evolved to the use of toll-free 1-800 numbers, and then in July of 2005 we implemented the 3-digit 211 dialing system, which basically allows people to get a hold of us from anywhere in the county by simply dialing those three numbers. Easy to remember, don't need to be written down any place, 211. And that number is highly regulated at the federal level. 211 is for what 911 is for emergencies, 211 will be for social services, information and referral. So that number is very regulated at the federal level by the FCC, and only organizations that have been actually granted the authority to operate that number can claim or operate on the 211 3-digit dialing code. And we are proud that we were the first ones in California to get that designation from the FCC. And 211 is a system that is spreading throughout the nation. It doesn't have a consistent funding source. It varies from county to county, from state to state. In Connecticut, for example, the 211 service is provided on a statewide basis and is supported by the state of Connecticut. Geographically, they're smaller than we are here. Then if you were to go into Texas, for example, they have a model where they have collaboratives of several counties working together. In California, we're pretty independent, but we work very closely with our counterparts. Like, for example, if you were in San Diego and you dial 211, you will receive information and referral services, but it will not be us providing that service. It will be our counterpart. So our focus is in LA County, and the advantages of having a 3-digit dialing code are obvious, that it's easy to remember, day or night, just dial 211. And as the number becomes more and more known to the community, we can only expect that the need for our services is going to grow. Currently, we are serving less than 10% of the population of Los Angeles County on an annual basis. And based on national statistics, somewhere between 10 and 12% of the population is what is considered to be the ideal level of availability of information and referral services to the public.
Well, thank you very much. You've shared a great deal of historical information and current information that I think will be very helpful to anyone who has the opportunity to view this video. So thank you again.
Thank you.